Hello guys, welcome to this tutorial on question 4 of the English Language Paper 1 GCSE exam, and we're going to be focusing on this question, which is the evaluation question. Okay, first things first, just make sure you're really careful again about reading the lines that you need to deal with. So we're going to be focusing on line 16 to the end of the extract. So what to expect from an evaluation question? Well, you can expect you're always going to get a quote from a student, a teacher, whoever it might be, and they will have evaluated, they will have made a judgment or a critical comment on the extract that you've been working on. So in this instance, it's a student said, this part of the story set during breakfast time shows Alex is struggling to cope with his mother's illness. To what extent do you agree? Now, to what extent just means how much. How much do you agree with this? Now, the exam board have said you can 100% agree or disagree with whatever the comment is, or you can be balanced, and there's going to be you're not going to get any more or less marks for picking one of these. Okay, it's entirely about what are your feelings in this. So this shows that Alex is struggling to cope. How much do you agree with that? Well, if I read this and I'm looking at the things he's going through, he's having nightmares, he's angry with his dad, he's falling out with his siblings, and everyone's, even just the day-to-day things, their food and everything is all out of sync. Well, I'm inclined to say, yeah, I really do agree with this. I'm almost 100%. And we've got here some bullet points. And again, as with the structure question, I really would view this as you should do that, and think about this as a helpful way to structure your ideas. So we're going to consider our impressions. This just means, what do we think about Alex? We're going to evaluate, which is this core skill, how the writer shows that Alex is struggling to cope, and support with references to the text. References, now this can mean quotes, but it can also be you paraphrasing or just mentioning other things that go on, but that you're referring to explicit things that happen from the text. So evaluate. What do I mean by evaluate? I really mean to weigh up, to make judgments, to be able to look at it. And really, I suppose the key to this is to have an opinion. If you evaluate how the writer's done it, you're saying, they've done this and this is effective, or I think this really helps to show us that Alex is struggling to cope. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are any number of different things that we could talk about here, the nightmare, the falling out with the siblings, all of these kinds of things. So it's a case of you reading carefully and thinking, right, where can I see Alex struggling to cope? Here's an example. Now, we're focusing here on the writer, how the writer does things. So you could talk about elements of language or elements of structure, or you could just talk more generally about sort of the writer's style, the things that they've done. Now, my top tip would be, if you've been thinking really carefully about this for question 2 and this for question 3, there may be things that you can recycle from those questions. So if you've been really zooming in, as we did in the last tutorial on, let's have a think, well, less so for question 2, actually, because of it being requiring you to look at different lines. But in terms of the structure one, we were focusing on the dream, or the nightmare that Alex had. So we could say, straight away, the writer shows us that Alex is struggling to cope because of the nightmare. So my point really with this is, don't feel that just because you've mentioned or touched on something in question 2 and 3, or less so with 2, don't feel that you can't mention it for question 4. Now, because quite often my students will tend to make this a language question, which is okay, you can find elements of language, although not the stuff maybe from question 2. I'm just going to focus on something different, rather than pick out an adjective or a particular word. And equally, I'm not going to focus on structure, because We may have looked at things like the dialogue in the last question. I'm just going to focus on that first bullet point, which talks about my impressions of Alex. And something from my earlier reading that really stood out for me was when it says Alex was angry with his father, his sister's life in general, even with his mother for getting sick. Now this line to me really sort of conveys the sense of Alex struggling to cope, because he's angry with everyone in his life. His mum can't help getting sick, his dad's trying to cope, his sisters I'm sure he loves, but his emotion is anger. And that tells me that this is someone who's struggling to cope with the experience of his mum being ill. So that's what I'm going to think about and write up in my first paragraph. So how does the writer show that he's struggling to cope with this? So I'm going to focus straight away with the writer. The writer, now, because it's evaluation, I'm going to try and put an evaluative word in here. So I'm going to try and say the writer effectively shows that Alex is struggling to cope through his anger towards his family. So I've made a clear point here. The writer is showing he's struggling to cope. Now, I am, I suppose, if sort of looking at this realistically, I am probably blurring these two bullet points. But don't worry if you end up doing that, as long as you're kind of covering all of these. But I'll try and anchor it back into my impressions. So, our impression is, right, so let's go back to this. What is our impression? His father, his sisters, life in general, even his mother for getting sick. So our impression is that he is battling to deal with his fear and anger and his fear and anger that his mum is ill. Now, is he right to be angry with his dad and sisters and his mum? Not really, it's misdirected anger, isn't it? So, this anger is misdirected. So I'm going to now put the quote in. Alex was angry with his father, his sisters. It's becoming a long quote now, isn't it? So I'm going to do a bit of ellipsis here. His mother for getting sick. Now, I certainly wouldn't want to quote any longer than that. It's quite a long quote as it is. This anger is misdirected. Alex was angry with his father, his sisters, his mother for getting sick. The writer, what is the writer doing here? The writer is showing readers that Alex is isolating himself by lashing out at his family. What do we know about family? They're probably going to be the closest people in our lives, aren't they? They're going to be people we turn to and that love us and that we love unconditionally. So the writer is showing readers that Alex is isolating himself by lashing out at his family, the people who he loves the most. Right, but we've got to make now the connection between him lashing out and the fact that he's not coping. So what is this? This is almost a defensive reaction. He feels so angry about his mum being sick, about his mum getting sick, that the emotion overwhelms him. So, do I think, oh, Alex, what a brat, he shouldn't be nasty, he shouldn't be angry with his mum for getting sick, that's unreasonable. Well, maybe we feel that a bit, but actually I just feel really sorry for him because I can see that this is a boy who isn't coping and he doesn't know who to talk to about his feelings, and he's hurting and he's afraid. So as readers, we feel great sympathy because he is obviously hurt, afraid, and struggling with his relationships as a result of this. Oh, my hand's really aching. I've been doing a couple of these tutorials and it reminds me what it's like for you guys in the exams, and it also reminds me that what's important is not that you've done 3 pages for this question, but that you've really thought carefully. Now, one thing that I'm really aware of is that I'll have made mistakes as I'm writing this. Some of you are probably laughing even now, thinking she's an English teacher, she's missed a comma out there. Now, not that that's a good thing, obviously, but you're not going to get penalised for this because it's not marked for spelling, punctuation and grammar, questions 1 through to 4. But that being said, it's important to leave yourself some time to proofread it, to check, is what you've put down, does it make sense? And I'm just going to do that now and just make sure that the point I've made here really makes sense to an examiner. They don't know me, they don't know what I'm trying to say, so I've got to make things as clear as possible. So the writer effectively shows that Alex is struggling to cope, comma, through his anger towards his family. It's not the best grammar in the world. Our impression is that he is battling to deal with his fear and anger, and his fear and anger that his mum is ill. So I didn't need a comma there. Fear and anger that his mum is ill. This anger is misdirected. Alex was angry with his father, his sisters, his mother for getting sick. The writer is showing readers that Alex is isolating himself by lashing out at his family, the people who he loves the most. This is almost a defensive reaction. He feels so angry about his mum getting sick that the emotion overwhelms him. As readers, we feel great sympathy because he's obviously hurt, afraid, and struggling with his relationships as a result of this. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. Now, I'm not 100% delighted. I think probably my phrasing could have been a bit better here. But don't overthink and don't get too picky. But what have I done here? I've thought about the way the writer is presenting Alex, the way that the writer presents Alex as someone who is struggling to cope. I've got references to the text here. I've used a specific quote. And to what extent do I agree? Well, I really agree. Now, maybe I actually would go back and add in a little bit to address this. So I'm just going to start with, I absolutely agree that Alex is struggling. So I'm just starting off with a viewpoint here and showing an opinion, and then that links onto my first point as it is. So I would be trying, now you've got 20 marks, significant amount of time here, so you would be aiming to spend probably 25 minutes on this question. Now I can see that I'm 13 minutes or so into this tutorial and I've done one paragraph. Excuse me. I'm aware I've been talking to you guys as well. So I think that if a student was producing, 3 points like this, then they would be there or thereabouts full marks. But even 2 points developed and detailed like this would get you a really sort of decent grade. Hard to put a number on that, but I imagine that 2 like this, you would be looking at 14, 15 marks, and 3 like this that developed it should be there or thereabouts full marks. So just remember, core skills for this. First off, making sure you use the right lines. Secondly, how much do you agree with the point of view you've been given? Then have an opinion on what the writer's doing. You can talk about language, although don't use your stuff from question 2, because that will be the wrong lines. You can talk about structural techniques that they've used, and you could recycle stuff from that, from question 3. And you can talk generally about the style, or just the things the writer's done, like I did. I focused on the idea about the writer showing that Alex was angry, and I used a quote from that. So they're the core skills. That's what we should be working towards. That's question 4.